GM, welcome to what's going to be another fantastic edition of DevNTell the Builder series. And in today's episode, what we'll be doing is building our own L3 chain using Arbitrum's tech stack. Specifically, we'll be using the Orbit SDK built by the folks at Off-Chain Labs to deploy and configure our own custom chain. And then we'll run our chain on a Nitro Node, and then we'll make a few RPC calls against it just to prove it works. And with that, let's get going here. Before we get into the weeds of actually developing our own chain, let's spend some time learning about what orbit chains actually are. So at a very high level, an orbit chain is a Arbitrum construct allowing anybody to permissionlessly deploy their own L2 or L3 blockchain. Now, you might be asking yourself, Narb, why would anybody want their own chain? That's a very fair question. So, for example, you could be developing a project that has very specific requirements around gas prices or speed, response time, settlement times, you name it. And sometimes there isn't a one size fits all blockchain. And this is what customizable blockchains are really meant for, these L3 chains. So Arbitrum Stack will allow you to configure your blockchain for things like gas price or even setting your own custom gas token, which can be any arbitrary ERC20 token. So it really depends on your needs. But if you ever need a chain for your specific project, the folks at Arbitrum have your back, and you can deploy your own using their native tech stack. Orbit chains can be configured as either rollups or any trust chains. A rollup means that ultimately the transactions will settle on a base layer 1 chain like Ethereum, but allow the layer 2 chain to scale with speed, basically increasing throughput. For example, Arbitrum 1 is a chain who's configured as a rollup. In contrast, a AnyTrust chain is a similar concept, but there's some more relaxations around security that enable the transactions to settle cheaper and even faster. So, for example, Arbitrum Nova is a chain that is configured as an AnyTrust chain. And which you choose is really up to your use case, but you have both options available. All right, that's enough chat for now. Let us go and actually create our very own chain. All right, let's get into it. So what you see here is a template that I cooked up. It's pretty bare bones at the moment, but we can take a look at the environment variables. And what we'll need is a private key to deploy our contracts, a parent RPC, which will be Arbitrum Spolia, and a transaction hash here that will come into play a little later on. All right, so first thing we want to do is make sure we're using the right version of node. Looks like we are. Now we'll do a yarn install. Get all of those dependencies installed here. Waiting. Done, nice. Now, the next thing we want to do is create a new folder. We're going to call it source, src. And inside this folder, we're going to create a new file. We're going to call it deploy rollup chain.ts. And I'm just going to copy and paste over some code here, and we'll go over what it's doing. So at the top, we're just importing some libraries, and then we're setting up our environment variables. And here, I am creating a couple new private keys that will represent our batch poster and our validator. And then I'm setting up a client set up to point to Arbitrum Spolia, our parent chain. I'm grabbing the deployer address, which is going to be us. And now I'm building up the rollup configuration, basically passing in chain ID, and setting the data availability community to false. So we are creating a rollup and not any trust chain. And finally, going to call create rollup, passing in our parameters. All right, now let's actually go and deploy our chain. But first, let's make a make file. And we will add a new command in here, deploy chain. That will simply run yarn run dev deploy chain. So now let's actually run the command. So we'll type make deploy chain, and we run that. And just like that, we have deployed the chain. All right, with our chain deployed, let's take some time to actually look into this transaction and see what happened. So as you can see, we have about 9 contracts that were deployed by our script, a bunch of transfers, and all this costs around 0.12 ETH. If we click into more details and we click decode input data, we can see there's a bunch of metadata here that went into the deployment of our chain. And if we go deeper into the decoder, we can see a broader breakdown of all the elements that kind of went into us creating our chain. So we got a bunch of stuff here, like the address there is the owner of the chain ID, that's our unique chain ID, and a bunch of other configuration components here that I've linked below in the description so you can check out on your own time. So with our chain effectively deployed, we now need to create a configuration file that we can pass along to our Nitro node to run it locally. So to do that, we'll create a new script. We'll call it get node config.ts. And I'm going to go copy and paste some code in here. And this is a pretty simple script. All we're doing is we're loading in a couple of environment variables, creating a couple of new private keys for our batch poster and validator. And then we actually need to take that transaction hash that you see in the console below, and we're going to use that to fetch the metadata we saw in the Arbiscan link, like the core contracts and some other metadata around our chain. And then we're going to package that along, decorate with some extra data like chain name, DevChain is what we'll call our chain, and our script will pump out a JSON file. So now with our script complete, what we'll want to do next actually is create a new folder so our node config JSON could get output to it. So we'll call it Orbit Node. And now what we want to do is actually go into our make file, and we want to add a new command here. We'll call it node config, paste it in here. And now we actually will just run it. We'll do make node config. And if we press enter here, and we go look in our Orbit node folder, we'll see a node config JSON actually output here. So what this data actually represents is the configuration file that we will want our Nitro node to basically run against. So there's a bunch of different things in here which you can go explore in the repo after the fact. But what we want is this info JSON. And this basically has the core metadata that we will need to pass into our Docker command. So now that we have our node config output here, what we want to do is now actually run our Nitro node against this config. So what we're going to do is I will paste in a run command here, called run chain. And what it's doing is doing a Docker run against a volume, specifying a couple ports, the Nitro node image, our chain's name, DevChain. And you see that info JSON there. What we're going to do is paste in the info JSON value that we have in our node config JSON. Take that value, and we are going to paste that in here. And with that, we further round out our command by basically turning off a couple of fancier things like staking and validation so that we can more easily run things locally. All right, now let's put it all together and actually run a Nitro node with our custom chain. So we make run chain, and this will boot up our chain. You can see a bunch of info logs here. So now let's go into another terminal and let's run a curl command to get the chain ID. What's wrong here? Ah, yes, I missed the C. So curl, and now we get a result. That is a hexadecimal value. So we'll need to convert that to a decimal. So we'll do to this with that hex value. And there we go. We indeed get our chain ID. If we copy paste that there, we see indeed there is our chain ID. All right, that's a wrap for today's episode of DevNTell. Just to recap what we learned today, we learned all about Orbit chains. We learned how we can deploy our own chain using Arbitrum's Orbit SDK, which we did. We called our chain the DevChain. And then we learned how to run our chain on a locally running Nitro node. And we ran some RPC calls just to prove it works. And there is quite a bit more you can actually do with your Orbit chain, such as creating a set of bridge contracts that allow you to move Arbitrum Sepolia ETH from Arbitrum Sepolia to our dev chain and vice versa. And a boatload of other customizations that we didn't get a chance to go over today, but we will leave this to you as a further exploratory step. And the links to all that content to help you take that next step with your chain will be linked in the description below. So definitely go check out those awesome docs by the folks at Arbitrum. And with that, we will catch you back here next time for another great episode of DevNTell. Till then, have a good one, folks. If you enjoyed this episode of DevNTell, be sure to subscribe to never miss an episode. Till the next one, cheers.